So staying humble is actually a tricky subject that I can talk about for a while. It's tricky because there are pros and cons to it and there's a certain way to go about it that will work. So first, let's ask this question. Should you be humble? Is it helpful? In a lot of people's opinions, yes, mine included. But my opinion is more complex than a lot of other people's about it. So my opinion on it is yes, you should be humble and yes, it's helpful. But why? So I started a new career not all that long ago. It's likely not my lifelong career, but it's one that I can go upwards very far with in both wages and satisfying work and complexity of what I do. Whenever I do decide to leave, if I do, I can take the skills with me back to my home and make projects on my own and sell them for some pretty good money. What I'm talking about is carpentry. I didn't even have to think about being humble or not. It was instinctive that I knew I was entering a complex field with nuances and subtleties and tools and measurements and different methods everywhere. And if I wasn't very humble, I was going to get chewed up and spit out by the veterans of woodworking there who have been doing it 5 or 20 years. I didn't know anything about it, and I later found out that the department I went to, commercial, typically only accepts people who have some woodworking experience. There was definitely some impatience from one guy who has a short fuse when I didn't know how to use tools I had never used before, but don't get the wrong impression, he's actually a pretty cool guy. Anyway, it was crucial during this time that I wasn't like, one day I'm gonna be better than you all, or anything like that, because they would have laughed in my face and probably wouldn't have helped me nearly as much and I would have come off as arrogant. I kept my mouth shut, occasionally making jokes and all that, and just learned all I could and did things as well as I could without making big mistakes. Well, eventually, I went from knowing how to use 0 woodworking tools to 50 tools. Eventually, I learned how to do 0 woodworking things to 50 things pretty well. I can't be a master at them because there's so many different skills to learn, but I do know how to do them how they're supposed to be done. Being humble opened up this avenue in my life, and now I have the knowledge to keep pursuing this path even if I leave this place where I'm at. But I basically just keep throwing myself into new situations there to get as much experience as I can. So that's an example of how I had to be humble with my specific job. Humility in general is a great trait to have. Confidence is good, but make sure you don't come off as too cocky or it's off-putting and super embarrassing when you do make mistakes, which everyone does. So that's humility with your job, which I'd pretty much always recommend because there's always someone out there better than you. Let's talk about a nuance here. Should someone who has a few years in the job and is good at what they do and perceived that way by others still be humble? The answer is still yes, but they should also have some well-earned confidence. When you're the absolute best in the world at something, should you be humble? Celebrities try to be humble usually, or at least come off that way in interviews, because they know the public responds to it well. In all actuality, behind closed doors, when you're the absolute best at something, or one of the best, it's incredibly hard and very unlikely to stay humble. One of the things being humble is based on is that there's always someone out there better than you. That kind of goes out the window when you're the number one guy. So I think celebrities like to try to appear humble, but most in actuality are pretty narcissistic behind closed doors. It'd be hard not to be in their shoes. One thing you do have above celebrities though is you haven't sold your soul, so that's the biggest deal possible. A lot of them have and say they have in interviews. Selling your soul may be a metaphor, it may be an actual thing, we just don't know. It could mean selling your soul to the people who made the contract, or they could be talking about the actual soul to the devil. Who knows? Anyway, celebrities show you can pull off appearing humble while not actually being humble on the inside. You don't have to do this, and I'll tell you why. They're not fully embodying the virtue of humility, and humility does not mean you can't have big goals and stuff like that. Humility is understanding that there are no chosen ones or anything like that. You are part of the human race just like the rest of us. A big problem with the world right now is there's a bunch of people who think they're chosen trying to destroy the lives of people who think they are not chosen. If they had the virtue of humility, this wouldn't happen. Virtues really are something to take very seriously because some of the world's biggest problems stem from big groups of people lacking virtues. So let's talk about when humility is used in a bad way. So I notice humility is being pushed on us by the mainstream, so that's why I question it a bit. There's a song that literally goes, "Bitch, be humble." I like Kendrick, I do, but I carefully think about why anything that's being played on the radio is being played on the radio. The radio can have good music, but free music being played to everyone always has some kind of message behind it. When it's free in our capitalist society, there's always a reason. So anyway, I think the type of humility they want you to have is one where you stay in your little box and don't get too uppity. So listen, this is probably the last time I'll say this, but if you truly want to live a humble life and don't have any desire to better yourself, I completely understand. I really mean that. I see the appeal. This is kind of my last notice to jump out of these videos while you can because that type of life is valid and I don't want you to pressure yourself to improve yourself to great heights if you don't want to. As long as that type of humility is the life you really want. So back to what I was saying, humility goes too far when it becomes this kind of subservientness where you let everybody walk all over you. I feel like that's more the humility they want from us. So let me show you how you can be humble while still having big goals. So you're humble, but not so humble that you think lowly of yourself. That's a good spot to be. Now, how do you reconcile that while also having big goals and wanting to be awesome or already being awesome? Just have the big goals like a very successful person would and just always recognize that there's someone out there better than you at something. That will never stop being true. The world is so gigantic that every little thing we do has millions of people doing it, so if you become a master at tennis, well, there's a master at chess that would kick your ass. The consequence of not being humble is it usually repels people if you take it too far, so it definitely is useful. Being humble also doesn't mean you have low self-esteem, it just means you're very realistic about where you fit in the world. You can have very high self-esteem and still be humble, thinking you're awesome and have many good traits, but still recognizing that at the end of the day, we're all just one small part of a very giant whole. Another part of being humble in general is recognizing you don't always have the answers and aren't always right. If I said anything about the more complicated parts of how a car works, I'd sound like a complete dumbass. At the same time though, I do want to learn more about how they work because it's just kinda manly to know about cars. I can do some of my own fixes on a car, but all the electronic stuff is a big nah for me, dog. So let's talk about practical ways you can be humble. So you get the general idea of being humble while still thinking well of yourself. Let's translate it into actions. Gratitude is one big part of being humble. A lot of our lives we're focused on our wants. I want this, I want that, I want this thing I totally don't need, I want that thing I totally don't need, or I'm not going to make it, fam. Recognize at the end of the day, you still have much to be grateful for. I'm talking to the 99% of the people who watch my videos here, but the 1% I'll get to in a bit. Be grateful that you have an able body that can make what's in your mind happen out there in the world. Your mind is the idea center, your body is the tool that makes it happen. But remember, people like Stephen Hawking have been around, so even if something crazy like that happens to you, you can still do great things. Be grateful you have all your limbs, some don't. Be grateful you have a roof over your head with AC, that's first world and such a crazy thing we take for granted. There are a lot of people just out there, man, here in the USA or in third world countries, they're just out there in the street a lot of the time just weathering the conditions. Whoever invented AC, Willis Carrier actually, solved one of man's biggest problems. Be grateful you have access to food very easily and don't have to go out and hunt and kill things. Now that's a kind of complicated ethical subject on its own, but you were not the one who actually killed the meat, and even if you stopped eating it, they'd still make it. Still, if you have the time, it's a good idea to try to look for brands that at least try to say they ethically treat their animals well. Be grateful for the fact that you're watching this video, meaning you're out here not in jail for 30 years. Although even if you were in jail, you could be grateful for the fact that you're still alive and still able to do whatever you want with your mind. They have your body, they do not have your mind. One of the best guys at our job was in jail for 5 years, and you never would have known it with how incredibly skilled yet humble he is. If you're homeless, be grateful that sometimes people give you assistance as long as you ask nicely, and that as long as you're patient, someone somewhere down the line will give you the chance if you ask for it. Gratitude is a great part of just flowing with the moment. You focus on what you already have, recognizing that you already have some good things, but since you're wanting to improve yourself, you're always striving for more. Not necessarily just more possessions, but more from yourself. So that was practicing gratitude. Another way to be humble that you wouldn't be able to do if you're extremely cocky and thought others were below you is to listen to others. Everyone's got something you can learn from them, whether it's one tiny thing or many things. Humility is recognizing other people's value and that you still have things to learn by listening to them. You can learn what not to do from the bad people out there while learning what to do from the good people. But remember, things are complex. Maybe the bad guy knows how to make some killer waffles. You could learn that skill from him. Another big part of humility is knowing when to ask for help. There's some lifts at my job where if one guy tried to do them by himself, he'd literally break his back and damage whatever he's working. Quit the false machismo and just ask a guy to help you. You can still do most things yourself if that's how you roll, but there's some things you just need help for. Rome wasn't built in a day. One final thing I'll say on humility is taking ownership of when you make a mistake. You do have to be a little careful about this. I don't want you to end up in a situation that could be avoided. But generally, you should take ownership of mistakes and actively try to fix them. When people don't own their mistakes, it shows lack of humility. It's basically denying the possibility they could ever be wrong. Taking ownership of mistakes also shows honesty, which is incredibly valuable in all areas of life. Our society loves vanity and narcissism and actively tries to push you to be that way, and I think I figured out why. Narcissistic people don't want to help others, they just straight up don't. Everything revolves around themselves. That would be a great way to make a fragmented society that doesn't help each other out, wouldn't you say? One of the more subtle things I don't see talked about a lot. Me, but no sense of community. A sense of community is what's needed most these days. You can be an individual and also be part of a community. So to summarize, be humble, but don't think lowly of yourself. You can still be a badass and do incredible things and think you're awesome while still being humble.